Assalamualaikum. Selamat siang untuk semuanya. Thank you for asking me to provide a few words on this, the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. First of all, I want to say that from the point of view of a non-Muslim, of course, I see this somewhat differently to the Muslim approach to Iran. As a non-Muslim, of course, I don't see the guardianship question in the same way. But let me explain why I support strategically the Islamic Republic of Iran. First of all, the Iranian Revolution expelled a foreign occupier, a type of neo-colonialism through the dictatorship of the Shah, which crippled the Iranian people for a generation. Second, the leadership of that revolution was clearly, and still is, Islamic, and it provides the foundation for the principles, the values, the very strong political will that Tehran has exercised ever since. Thirdly, there's been very strong, very well documented investment of the government in Tehran in its people, in its education and health, in human development measures. If we look ever since the beginning of the Human Development Project in 1990, more than 30 years, it's been Iran and China and Iran that have been the leaders in the group of high development. Why? Because of the investment in education of boys and girls, the investment in health, the advances in all those areas, and then the application of those gains into a wide range of social and industrial developments, such that Iran has freed itself from being simply tied to being an oil exporter. And of course, people in the West often talk about with nostalgia about the supposed role of women under the Shah. They show some pictures of women wearing short dresses and in a North American style at the time of the Shah. Going to university, this was a tiny group of women. The average schooling of women and girls in Iran before 1979 was about 2 years each. Now it's more than 10 years each, and almost gender equity. So very big advances domestically. Fourthly, it's notable, and this is the reason why there's so much hatred expressed towards Iran, that Iran supports all of the independent peoples and states of the region. They support, without sectarian consideration, they support the Palestinian resistance, all of the factions of the Palestinian resistance, whether they're socialist, nationalist, or Sunni Muslim. There are virtually no Shia Muslims in Palestine. They support secular or pluralist Syria. Of course, they support Hezbollah in Lebanon. They support the people in Yemen, the new revolutionary government in Yemen. They've supported the Iraqi people. So it's the most important, Iran is the most important, the leading state in the independent group of states. And finally, the most likely to lead an alliance to expel the foreign occupiers, the invaders, those that have been prosecuting the economic siege, the terrorist wars, and so on. Iran has the principles, the political will to do this. And that's why, as I say, I'm a strategic supporter of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, I've been asked to comment on a couple of other things to do with Iranian history. One is the time of the Cold War and the impact of the Iranian Revolution on the two big blocs at that time. Of course, it's fair to say that when this terrible war was incited, particularly by Washington, behind Saddam Hussein to attack Iran at a time of weakness at the beginning of, just after the revolution, when the state was not nearly as strong as it is now. Saddam Hussein had the support of most of the world at that time. There were very few people, I think China was one of them, but there were very few states who were actually supporting Iran at that time. Iran was to a large extent on its own, of course, with some regional allies, not least Syria. Not because Syria wanted an Islamic state, but because Syria had a strategic relationship with the Iranian Revolution from the very beginning. So in that sense, the Soviet Union also supported Saddam Hussein. Maybe there were some different practices of the Chinese government at that time. So the Iranian Revolution really had to establish itself without powerful allies to entrench itself, and it's been through those own efforts over the decades that Iran has become the strong nation that it is today, and feared and hated by the colonizers and the imperialists in the region. And when they talk about an Iranian land bridge, for example, it's the great fear of the nations of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine joining up and resolving once and for all this colonization of Al-Quds, the colonization of Palestine, the terrible colonization, the terrible fiction of two states and so on that's been going on for more than 7 decades. So Iran built itself up largely on its own efforts with its own principles and maintained a very strong political will and a very strong will to support the other independent peoples of the region. Now the US, for its part, had its very strong relationship with the Shah. They did not even see the revolution coming. I think it's very clear on the historical records that the then President Jimmy Carter was talking about Iran as a haven of stability and peace just a year or so before the revolution. The wife of the former emperor, who wrote fairly recently an autobiography, says she didn't see anything coming either. They did not see it coming. But the Iranian Revolution had remarkably low level of bloodshed, considering that very few people in Iran wanted to support the emperor. He was a dictator backed by a hated secret police, and that's the way the US likes it. If you look at the US today, they've hated Iran ever since the revolution, and their strongest allies are those Arab monarchies in the Persian Gulf and, of course, the apartheid regime in Palestine. So the US has always preferred to deal with dictatorships, monarchies, even though they talk about dictatorships as any strong independent state that resists them. Of course, they were very happy with General Suharto in Indonesia for many decades. In Latin America, it's been a very similar case. They talk about democracy. They talk about democracy quite a lot. They prefer to deal with a emir or a king or a military dictator and have things the way that they want. And of course, that's the way they have their fleet in Bahrain. That's the way they have their air base in Qatar, because they can deal with these monarchies or dictatorships, basically. And that's why they had that relationship with the Shah at that time. Strangely, or remarkably really, given that they continue to talk about democracy, it's the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, who they now have at the head of their regime change coalition. It's laughable, really, because it's impossible to imagine that in the 21st century we're talking about democratic movements led by aristocracies, former hereditary monarchies and so on. It's like if you said Prince Harry was going to lead a democracy movement in Australia, people would laugh. But that's what they're doing now with the so-called Prince Reza Pahlavi, backed by some Hollywood stars and some other paid mercenaries, and the terrible cultish terrorist group, the MEK, which was based in Iraq, hated by the Iranian people for the atrocities they carried out against Iran during the war in the 80s. Then they moved to Paris. Now they're in Albania. They're being used against Iran. They're being used against Syria too, I found out about a year ago. They are really guns for hire that the US uses. So in many respects, the US has not changed its policy much from that which it had supporting the Shah, the so-called emperor there. They're very good with the propaganda wars. They ran a massive social media campaign when that young woman, Mahsa Amini, unfortunately died. Of course, she wasn't beaten, as they say, but the numbers of millions of tweets to do with Mahsa Amini in a couple of months far outnumbered those over Black Lives Matter, where you have people in the US, African American people, beaten to death, shot to death by the police in public and filmed. Far more propaganda about poor Mahsa Amini than any of those people in the US themselves, where, by the way, dozens of people die in prison every day in the US, which imprisons more of their own citizens than any other people. So the US has not learnt many lessons. It simply keeps mouthing its aggression, its barking false propaganda against Iran, of course not recognising the achievements of the revolution, not recognising even US university studies which say around about 70% of people in Iran actually trust their government. That's about double the number of the people in the US that trust the government in the US. And that comes from the University of Maryland and some other US groups there. So they ignore all those things because propaganda these days has very little to do with real information. Anyway, my greetings to all of you. I wish you success for this event. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'll be traveling to Iran on the day of the event, so please have a very good conference.